It's a very great pleasure to be here, great honor. And thank you so much to all our friends in Climate Kick who have been fantastic collaborators on this journey. So, I just wanted to start off with a little comment about, this is the first time I've ever given a presentation not wearing a suit, okay? I have a big picture of a wonderful Dutchman called Eckhart Vincent opposite my desk, and he never wore a suit, and he hated suits, and he was such an innovator and a mentor, and he said, you represent the future, Paul, you shouldn't, present like you're in the past. So there you go. And really, this is I'm just going to share with you kind of a bit like my problems, so you're my kind of analyst this evening, okay, and I hope we can try and work through these problems together, because they're not just my problems, I think they're our problems, but let's see how we do. Also, I know quite a few of you are in the kind of harder science side of things, and that's great. We need holistic comprehension and interaction with these problems. You know that, but I'm just going to give you my personal take on it. But I would really encourage that thinking that, like, this is social science, this is new media, this is engineering. Everything is just one thing. I think my friend Ed Gillespie was speaking here recently, and he, I think, was encouraging this engagement with the self. Okay, slides, annoying, quickly. Democracy, very important thing. Yesterday we had a bit of a celebration about what democracy means. It's kind of important. If you don't have democracy, it's a disaster, okay? So we had this democracy, very nice democracy, we love democracy. And it didn't happen by accident, it took a long time. These principles were won over thousands of years, civil wars, much trouble, strife, and then, we have a fully functioning democracy. Isn't that great? But there's a complication. Are corporations running the world? You could spend a long time discussing that. Maybe we'll spend a long time discussing that. It hasn't taken corporations very long to become the dominant organization on this planet. Please be in no doubt how influential corporations are. They are faster and bigger and stronger and better organized than anything the world has ever seen before, and they're very young. Very young. And it's a bit like that novel Lord of the Flies, if you're familiar with it. The children are left alone without any adults, and it can get a little complicated. So globalization exists. We know this. I'm going to assert to you that we have to do something about it. There are problems in this world right now. I'm not even going to talk about climate change. I might ask a question that I don't even want an answer to now, but how many avoidable deaths by 2100? I asked some students in Columbia, somebody said between 1 and 3 billion. That's a big number. So, is planet Earth governed? Do you believe anyone has the power to protect you from climate change? Well, of course, the government does. The government does. But I'm going to suggest to you sustainability is the name we give to problems the government can't fix. Should we have lesbian and gay marriage? That's not sustainability. How much GDP goes into the health service? That's not sustainability. But if you look through government like they're not even there, sustainable development. And I won't read this out, but it's from 1932. Look at that. The rise of the modern corporation. The state seeks to regulate the corporation. Corporations becoming more powerful make efforts to avoid regulation. The future dominated by corporations. So globalization, this huge economic fact, but nobody ever thought about the political implications of globalization. Governments do rule citizens, okay? The police have total power backed by the army. I don't doubt that. But corporations stop government from making laws that negatively impact sales of products. Can I prove this? On the 23rd of September, at a CDP event in New York, the US Secretary of State John Kerry spoke, and you can check the record on the website of the US State Department. And he said he had 55 votes in the Senate to tax gas. And he had the support of Exxon and Shell and Texaco. And he said, but coal went on TV and scared people. That's the US Secretary of State who says he can't protect his people because companies are using marketing dollars to subvert the democratic process. It's a coup. In a sense, that's what he's saying. So, we do face serious danger. And the question I have for us all this evening is what we're going to do about it. I'm going to suggest to you that business and politics are, in fact, the same thing. And most importantly, and this is key, democracy isn't just stable. Democracy needs to evolve constantly. And when you spend your money, you're actually voting. When you invest your money, you're actually voting. But it's so new that our job is to help society understand and develop into that. I'm not going to read this whole quote, but it talks about the limits of growth. And another topic we can talk about is the dematerialization of economic growth. And as engineers, you can look at the fact that one of the things we don't have in 2014 is decent fiber optic broadband infrastructure. Okay, enough. Why do I have the right to stand at this lectern? It is because I have been working for some time with others, many in this room, hard-working people. And we have built a new kind of democratic system. And this graph is not very clear, but what we've been doing is representing more and more investors over time. I think now we represent investors with $90 trillion, which is more than the GDP of the world. And then we tell all the biggest companies in the world to report to us. This year, 5,000 did, and 200 cities. And politicians like us. It's not, on that same stage, on 23rd of September, was Ban Ki-moon and Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank. Why do they come to our launch events? I think because they see that we have a role in getting business to account. It's not very clear here, but in different countries in the world, very large numbers of corporations report through us. And we are a data-driven organization. I mean, there are numerous examples of our data, but even just on Google Finance, you can see how corporations are responding to climate change. Because we're a not-for-profit. We have organized for 12 years now for investors to ask the companies to report on greenhouse gas emission strategy on climate change. And as I said, 5,000 do, and that data is publicly available. Our secret weapon, okay, is that we write a letter to the chair of the board of the company. And actually, before we send that letter, we circulate it to all the world's investors. And we say, will you sign this letter? And in the first year, 35 investors with 4 trillion did. And the next year, 95 investors with 10 trillion. And then 20 trillion. And so if you were the chair of RVA or BMW or IBM or Coca-Cola or Exxon, on the 1st of February this year, you got a letter. And the first line says, as investors with $92 trillion, we require you to provide this information. So what we're doing is we are asserting the authority of the owners over the corporation, so they are forced to respond. Another US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, spoke at our first launch event in New York, and she was the director of the New York Stock Exchange at the time. She said, our business is to help investors vote with their money. If you give false information to CDP, you are lying to 767 shareholders with 90 trillion. You are in breach of securities violation in every country in the world. So, Walmart, the big American retailer, they didn't report to us for 3 years. Then they reported to us, and they put the thing past the company secretary, the legal expert, and they said, what's the margin of error? And the guy said, I don't know, 10, 15%. They said, must be under 5% if you report to shareholders. Plus, more than 2,000 of the companies get an external verification statement because we kind of give them scores like marks, and they get more marks if they get external verification statement. So they're spending about $150 million a year just on verifying the data. That's your first question. Second question, how are we funded? Oh, it's really hard. Really hard. We provide the service for free to investors, and we provide the service for free to corporations. My bosses are 8 people who must be unpaid under UK charity law, so they can sack me. We get probably about 1/3 of our money from governments, 1/3 from philanthropists, like charitable foundations, and about 1/3 from business. It was Walmart originally, and then a whole bunch of other companies said, we really like this CDP thing, can we share it with our suppliers? So they started paying us. We now have a group of about 65 large companies that tell their suppliers to respond to CDP, and we have about, most of the response, about 3,000 coming through this supply chain business. So we receive about 1.7 million pounds from the supply chain people because they do pay us for a service. But I mean, absolutely, are we kind of compromised, if Exxon say, we give you $10 million if you give us an A grade? It's tempting, but actually no, because it would destroy our credibility, and these politicians would stop supporting us. So the GRI, or the Global Reporting Initiative, is another not-for-profit, and it establishes guidance for how companies should sort of report on this kind of stuff in their, so to say, CSR reports. So it's a kind of taxonomy. It's like an approach or a process. We are different because we compel the companies to respond, and they have to put the data directly into the same ORS, we call it online reporting system. It goes into one database that we control, and then we serve up that data to other sources. So the fundamental difference is it's a single unified electronic system, whereas GRI is producing guidance for people to produce their own reports. We have expanded to water disclosure and also forest deforestation. So we cover, so to say, the greenhouse gases, water, and deforestation. We do not cover any social issues at all. In terms of supply chain, as I mentioned, those 65 companies in our supply chain business, about 3,000 of their suppliers are reporting. And if a Chinese company, for example, and I choose China because we have a lot of problems getting Chinese companies to respond to the investor program. But if a Chinese company is written to by 3 or more of our supply chain members, we have a 100% response rate. Not really. I mean, 2,000 of them are vast public companies, with like 20,000 people each operating in 20 countries average. And most of the supply chain companies are really big. I mean, we've grown a lot recently, but we're like 150 people. It's extremely hard. Our technical team in London or whatever deal with something like 7,000 queries in the 3 months of the reporting period. Companies phone up and say, what's the conversion factor for burning rubber tires and furnaces? And nobody knows. So we're just wiped out, right, dealing with the world's largest data exchange on climate change in quite a few languages. But, I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of consultants and suppliers that support companies in doing this kind of work. And we do have a kind of benchmarking service called Reporter Services, which is designed to support people in this. We weren't sure if we should be like a for-profit or a not-for-profit. And then we were given £20,000 over a kind of lunchtime conversation from a philanthropic foundation. And without really realizing it, that set the model. But we realized there were real advantages in that. And in fact, for the first 4 years of our operations, we didn't take a single dollar from a private sector organization, not one. So it was all the, so to say, philanthropic organizations that put money into us. And they were not investments because we have no shares to give away. CDP1 was the really hard one. CDP2, difficult. CDP3, quite easy. 4, 5, 6, super easy. 10. I mean, I don't, How can you establish yourself from nothing? It's really hard. We would go to visit investors and said, would you like some information on climate change from companies? So we're like, maybe. It's free. And they would go, maybe. And we said, well, we think we can get you some free information. They went, how? And we'd say, well, would you sign a request for this information? And they'd say, no, it's wrong. This is not right at all. And so we'd say, okay, sorry, you're right. Excuse us. And we would go off and modify it a little bit. And then we would come back and say, would you sign this one? And we did that for a year and a half, okay? And in the end, we got to a situation where we couldn't get anyone to sign it, but we did manage to get 18 investors to allow us to say that they were intending to sign it, okay? It's classic book building, right? So then the dates have changed now, but I remember in 2002, particular day, we sent it out and we said, these are the final documents. They will go on this date. Will you sign them? And these 18 investors, APG was on there, the big Dutch fund, which didn't actually sign CDP1. Swiss Re was on there, Munich Re was on there. These reinsurance companies, they're all over climate change. Allianz was on there. Actually, I'm not sure they were on the intending to sign, but they did sign. But I remember I was just, I was at a friend's house and the phone rang and they said, oh, this is legal and general insurance, we will sign. Okay? That was the first signatory that somebody kind of trusted. We turned up at their offices enough times, okay, on time, and listened to them and integrated what they'd said. And we were providing them with free information. I mean, it was a long time ago we did this. The first time was in 2002. We couldn't even say climate change was real. That was too controversial. But what we could say was actions in response to the perception of climate change were real. And therefore, it wasn't a question of whether you believed it or not, but there was taxation and regulation coming. Our primary role was just to get the data and make it publicly available. And it's free. Okay, so you can go and look at the response from BASF tonight, free of charge. And Coca-Cola and Disney and McDonald's and everybody. But we started giving people scores about 9 or 10 years ago for how well they answered the questions. And we call this, so to say, a disclosure score. And we would give them marks out of 100, and we scored them, and that worked for a long time. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we said, can we try and score them on performance? And we have quite limited resource in CDP, especially then, but we worked with the big accountancy firm, PwC, and we began to trial a kind of methodology for scoring on performance. And, we trialed that, and it's all, everything that we do is on the website. Okay, so our website has got every single conceivable document you could ever imagine. All our consultations, all our training, all our guidance, all our scoring methodology, which is completely public and completely transparent. But essentially, the performance score says that the company has set a target for emissions reductions and has achieved it. If they've achieved a certain amount of emissions reductions and taken other activities, they can build up to an aggregate A grade. Now, some people might say, well, that's a bit simplistic. There's other things going on. This company may be doing good things here, but lobbying there in a negative way. Remember what I said about the coal companies lobbying? So, I am not going to stand here in front of you and say that we have got this right. We haven't got it right. We are getting it, we hope, a little bit more right each year. And I would encourage you or anyone else in here to look at our scoring methodology, find fault in it, find possible ways to improve it. Because the truth is that there is absolute genius in CDP, and it is you. And all the responding companies, and all the investors, and all the consultants, and the scientists, and the academics, and the governments. From the start, we created ourselves as public property. And we have been iteratively improving what we do through the years. So all I can really say in terms of how to say that BASF should have an A is, if they shouldn't, tell us how they should, or why they shouldn't. You see what I mean? Have people divested? I mean, I would say without doubt, yes. But we don't really tend to get emails saying, thank you for this information about this company we have since then divested. You see what I mean? I have this statistic a while ago that the data was being downloaded 1 million times a month from Bloomberg. I mean, it's gone up since then. Our global report was downloaded 62,000 times last year. Very large numbers of people make use of the data. As I said, it's on all Google Finance. But I mean, we've not really very easily been able to commission research in this area. I mean, companies have spoken to us in quite a positive way. Boeing said in the New York Times, CDP takes you through a series of questions. They asked us, did we have an environmental policy? We didn't, but we do now. Okay, that's about as nice as a company's ever really been. Because of course, they want to look as good as they can in front of the investors and so. But, I mean, to be honest with you, the really honest answer I'm giving you is it's not very closely tracked by us. But I'm pretty confident that I know large numbers of investors use this kind of material in their engagement. The second part of your question, could we be a kind of brokerage? Well, yes. And that's exactly as it should be. We've had something like 7, I think, or more, 1,000 emissions reduction projects reported through CDP last year. Many of them have a rate of return beyond 30%. We actually asked what the emissions reduction projects were, the capital investment, and the return. Some astonishingly good figures. So we would very much like to see ourselves, in fact, we do see ourselves, as accelerators, catalysts for this kind of investment. We even have a project called Action Exchange, which is quite interesting, where our supply chain members are saying to some key suppliers, look, we're going to get a whole bunch of emissions reduction experts to come and look over your company, promote emissions reduction investment, and they're going to send you a kind of proposal, and they're going to send it to us as well. Now, you may or may not decide to go ahead with it, but if it looks like it makes a lot of sense and you don't go ahead with it, we might wonder why. So, yes, that's absolutely what we want to do. It is not an algorithm. It is a series of criteria in terms of performance, so with a weighting. It is all on our website once again. To what degree have you, what are your emissions reduction targets from an absolute baseline? To what degree have you achieved them? And some other factors on strategy. And the combined grading is how do you get this A, B, C, D, E. We also have a right to exclude a company from an A rating, for example, if they're in receipt of considerable negative lobbying from, for example, environmental NGOs for something unreasonable, like, for example, that coal company advertising. I can't work at an organization that would give an A grade to a coal company that lobbies against the US government trying to protect its people. Okay, so good news about companies. I have been studying companies for 25 years, and if there's one thing I can say about them with confidence is they are unbelievably competitive. I mean, never underestimate how competitive the modern corporation is. It has grown into its unique position and role as the most vibrantly successful, powerful institution on the planet by being acutely competitive. So, once again, how do you get thousands and thousands of people all over the world to put themselves through exquisite pain? Build an Olympic stadium. That's all you have to do. And they will work their butts off to become the best swimmers and runners and hurdlers that the world has ever seen. And that's exactly what CDP is. It is an Olympic stadium where the most significant organization on earth, the modern corporation, competes for the attention of investors, for the public, and amongst its peers. And that is a very beautiful process. I think it's quite good to kind of leave us as the kind of Olympic stadium. That's what we do. We provide that place, or maybe an examination. is a better metaphor. That the corporations all take the exam, they all submit the data, and that data is made publicly available. And that consumes pretty much most of the efforts of our organization. There are a host of other consultants, experts, engineers who will come in and will encourage the corporation to be able to sort of do more and achieve more, if you see what I mean. So I think that we play a sort of facilitating benchmark. You know, Bill Clinton is quite good, actually, at public speaking. I mean, I'll tell you how good he is at public speaking. He gave a 50-minute lecture at a CDP launch, followed by a 10-minute standing ovation, and then I walked up to give my speech. And I just have to say, it was quite a difficult little speech to give, that one, you know. But Bill Clinton said, and I can remember what he said, the Carbon Disclosure Project is vital, and we've got to get everyone involved, and there's nothing to be afraid of. You've got to keep score. It's about business decisions that made sense in the past but don't make sense in the future. Got to keep score. You would believe me if I told you that companies are not shy in coming forward and telling us that we're doing it wrong. We are constantly assailed by literally thousands of companies who tell us we should do things differently. And what we're typically trying to do is listen to where the noise is in either ear, and then if we think that we got the balance about right, that's the kind of way forward. But yes, no, I mean, it's being the head of CDP scoring, for example, is quite a stressful job. We have previously ranked all companies together, and you know, we've been increasing the sophistication of the ranking, but we are moving now, just as you kind of suggest, towards a sectoral ranking. But I mean, one thing I would also stress is that we're a public interest, non-governmental organization. Actually, that's not quite true. I like to call us an AGO, an aspiring governmental organization, but that's another. So we offer the data, but many people buy it and produce their own rankings. Fund managers use the data internally. MSCI, who are the principal kind of fund management tool, they take the CDP data and they put weightings in. So it's kind of public property for everyone to use, but we hope to evolve our rankings. I can be honest with you and talk about the staff breakdown of CDP. You know, there's about 150 people in the organization, and probably, you know, about 5 people working on scoring, okay? So, you know what I mean? It's like, it's quite difficult. We outsource almost all our scoring to an outsourcing partner who does it for free to demonstrate their outsourcing capabilities. We supervise that process. We ensure there's quality control within that process. But I mean, it's extremely hard to increase the kind of nuance within it. We rely on private sector actors to also come in and so, for example, the world's largest fund manager, BlackRock, with 3.2 trillion, has recently started producing a kind of lower carbon portfolio for investors who are trying to kind of divest, you know, this kind of divest campaign. So that's an example of how people will take our methodologies and benchmarking and move it on. It's used a little bit. We'd like it used an awful lot, and we'd like you to tell us how we're going to make that happen. Well, we want you to develop it. Okay. I mean, please do, you know, because you could probably become a kind of billionaire. I mean, for example, it's pretty interesting investing. Isn't it shocking that there's not really any product differentiation in financial services? You know, all the adverts say, our logo, very good. I mean, the advertising industry is spending millions of pounds firing these blanks, you know, and here we have live ammunition. Very exciting. So, is it not possible that we can try and, can you think of ways that this freely available data source can go on an app And rather than people looking at the stupid sports result or something that's completely boring, they can concentrate on trying to keep themselves and their children alive, which I think is exciting. By really, I mean, investment, one thing I think is quite exciting, in the US there are these kind of stock picking shows on TV, and they go, oh, there's a hot stock, Google's up like 30%, it's going through the roof, There's a bit of a culture of an interest in an equity market, all right, at the individual citizen level. I can think of no greater goal for the polity and the great institutions of Europe and our business and our citizenry than to generate a similar degree of emphasis and excitement. Can you imagine if you didn't just think, oh, I've got to buy a life insurance policy? What if actually purchasing your life insurance policy or your investments or your pension, what if that was probably the most important, one of the most important ways you contributed to society, that you stood tall and you thought and you discussed with your friends and your neighbors about financial services? Can you imagine? Because we've all been at those kind of, dinner parties where people go, the system, no one's in charge, corporations and government can't, It's like, well, no, Don't try and point the finger there, because it actually comes straight back at you. We own these corporations. We, you and me. And we have the power, if we organize ourselves through that app, that you might write and save our planet. CDP is a system. I like systems. They're very good. So each year, we submit the kind of questions we want to ask to the investors and the supply chain members. And they're a little bit like a legislature. Yeah? They endorse that as a policy, and we submit it to the corporations, and the corporations comply with the policy. And that's a living process. Each year, we run consultations on the questionnaire. So I'm sorry to do this to you, but I'm going to put it back to you. Can you please advise us what data is maybe missing, or which data points should be pulled out and extracted? I mean, it's a challenge. I was going to come and talk a little bit about this. It's quite difficult in the supermarket, if you haven't got a sort of PhD in consumer product science, to buy something, all right? But corporations are aggregators. So we are starting to see companies like Unilever present themselves as solution providers. Can I show you an example of why I believe the corporation is the most intensely sensitive organism you would ever expect to see? Could you play that 1-minute video? Is that possible? This is a 1-minute video. Thank you. That video, as I understood, began to go viral, and as I understood, roughly speaking, Nestle said to Greenpeace, whatever you want tomorrow, we'll do it. Because that Kit Kat brand is on the Nestle balance sheet with a value of $1 billion. It's either formally accounted for as some kind of brand valuation, or the stock market knows it's there. And if something happens to the Kit Kat brand, that's $1 billion gone. Okay? So these corporations are the most incredibly sensitive to consumers, to citizens. In fact, a smart guy called John Alexander said, I must never call people consumers. Because consumers will only really care about consuming, I diminish someone when I call them a consumer. No. When citizens, as consumers, become concerned about a product, then the corporation will be, I think, fantastically attentive to the resolution. So it was just an example of why we have the power. About 40 of the largest 100 or 34 of the largest companies in China report through CDP. That's been doubling pretty much every year. But we have high participation from companies in the supply chain in China. So I would say that the Chinese government, like all right-thinking governments, are concerned to ensure that their corporations are, fit to compete in the 21st century and are, effectively, managing energy consumption and are also complying with global norms. So we've just started scoring Chinese companies, and it's a very exciting time. We look forward to developing. But because of our supply chain business, we have many, many companies reporting in China. So other comments I was just going to briefly make really related to, a lot of it we've covered, but I think there is a bit of a kind of mood of indifference in society, with regard to climate change. And I, if you look at membership of political parties, it's been falling, well, certainly in the UK and I think most countries. And also turnout at elections has been falling. And I think this is because people do feel somewhat disempowered. They sort of recognize that there's this great big global business system, and it kind of is very hard for individual governments to set tax rates or really deviate much from, what are the global norms. But people, that's the kind of glass half empty story. The glass half full story is that it's a difficult task, but, the kind of sword is the app, right? that you pull from the holster. It may be the hardest job that there's ever been, but there is the greatest technology to do it, right? And, you could have the loudest voices that there have ever been. It's typically engineering students that changed the world. It was engineering students that built Google and Facebook. And don't underestimate the power you have. But what is required is things that are big, simple, and incorruptible. That would be my advice for what that app should look like. Another thing that I wanted to suggest to you, which I think is important, is that the authority that you have, you are all experts in climate change. Now, we know how serious the problem of climate change is. And it's a sort of cliche in the UK, actually, that there are sometimes kind of busybody people who like to command others, saying, you can't do that, it's health and safety. You can't do that, it's a health and safety, it's against the health and safety regulations. If there's too many people in the lift, or if there's something in front of the fire exit, there's health and safety, But I want you to just try and think about, us as public safety officers. That's what we do. That's what I think myself and all my colleagues in CDP do. We are public safety people, And we have the opportunity to work with you and the world and the app to guarantee ecological security. That's our job. In 1992, every government in the world signed and ratified the 92 Convention on Climate Change and said that we are going to avoid dangerous climate change. So I want you just to sort of think for a minute about stepping in your power here and saying, well, we are able to instruct, if it's done clearly and coherently. For example, we were discussing a little bit earlier this notion of fiduciary duty. And I don't want to underestimate to you how powerful the financial markets are. They currently operate a bit like zombies because nobody's really that interested in their finances, and they put money in the bank or an insurance company and they never think about it. But actually, there's real power in finance, Now, the fiduciary duty, all people who look after money for other people have what's called a fiduciary duty. And it's a legal duty to invest in the best interests of the beneficial owner. Invest in the best interests of the beneficial owner. Well, what does that mean? And actually, it changes, believe it or not. Fiduciary duty changes. I'll give you one example. I met someone, she wrote her PhD about this. In the 1950 in the UK, there was a pension fund, and it had shares in a company that paid women less than men. And some of the pension fund members said, we should sell shares in this company. But the court ruled that the fiduciary duty meant that you couldn't sell the shares because the whole objective of the fund was just to make more money, right? But in 1970, exactly the same case was brought about a company that was paying women less than men. And do you know what? The court ruled that they could sell the shares of a company that paid women less than men. So what happened between 1950 and 1970? Well, the acceptability of paying women less for the same job diminished. That's important for climate change. Think about it. The data's here. What's the fifth assessment report? I quote, continued emissions of greenhouse gases will cause further warming and long-lasting changes in all components of the climate system, increasing the likelihood of severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts for people and ecosystems. Warming by the end of the 21st century will lead to high to very high risk of severe, widespread, and irreversible impacts globally, high confidence. So, we have the power to instruct our fiduciaries, to instruct the whole fund management. And why don't you just write to your pension funds or your bank and say, can you confirm in writing that you're investing in my best interests? It's an interesting question. What would they say? Just to notice that the market's a little bit sleepy. 23% of all funds are invested by machines. We all work for computers one day a week. But you can go to your fund manager or your bank. You can find an app that maybe unifies people, that goes to banks and says, are you investing in our best interests? Demonstrate that you are. And a piece of advice, I wouldn't say you should do X, because they're very good at saying, and then we shouldn't do X because it wouldn't be the right thing to do. No, what you do is you say, this is what the science says. Can you confirm you're investing in my best interest? That is the power that we can exercise. So far, so good? All right. I just wanted to kind of finish, really, with some other thoughts of who is on your side, our side. Old enemies like the military-industrial complex. You can actually argue that they are our friends now. A rear admiral from the British military, who was the UK Defence Department's climate change envoy, and then the Foreign Office's special envoy on climate change, has joined our advisory board. The US Secretary of State, the US Secretary of Defence has said climate change is a top risk. And you'll get people say, oh no, ISIS is a much bigger risk than climate change. ISIS came out of a civil war in Syria that was caused by drought and famine, caused by extreme weather events, caused by climate change. It's just, one global risk that is the mother of all global risks. And because it's just a little bit away, that there's something else in the newspaper that's more important, our job is to assert that authority. And I think that, one lesson I would offer from CDP, and, it's nice there's many of our colleagues here today, people who don't always do the most exciting thing. You have to be persistent and focused like nothing else matters. And that is how, in my belief and experience, you can get somewhere. But if you look on Google, CDP's referenced probably about 1 million times. We're quite big now in pretty much every country in the world. And we want to work with you in making the data more effective for citizens who might be using an app that might drive civil society, that might change the way we invest. All of that is work to be done.